proposal, which is, there we go, we're recording. So I'm going to talk about the role of grants within I work with nonprofit organizations. Some of them are, as Claire said in my introduction. So this 101 is geared toward raising money for a nonprofit. I recognize that some of you may be culture bearers who are looking to fund some of your own projects. The skills that we're going to talk about here are transferable. The overall picture of things is going to be something you could apply to your own efforts, but in full disclosure, that's not something that I do. I am a nonprofit organization grant writer, and so that's where my perspective and my expertise comes from. But the principles toward making a compelling request to potential funders should apply, even if you're looking for some things that are more geared toward your own personal work. So getting into the role of grants in your fundraising plan and organization's priorities. I'll give you a minute to read the slides. One of the first things that's important to understand, I had a call just last week about a guy has this great program idea that he wants funding, and he called me because he heard I was a grant writer and that's what he needs. Well, the reality is, this is Giving USA is a national study done every year that the information's a little delayed because they're pulling it from tax returns to show where charitable giving happens in this country. And so you'll see on this slide that 67% of it, 60%, so this is all the money that's received by charities and nonprofit organizations, including colleges and universities and hospitals. So there's some really big ones in there and some really small ones in there. This is where all of the funding that they receive, the donations that they receive, come from. So as you'll see, 67% of that is individuals. That's people like you and me who make a donation on Give NOLA Day or whatever to our favorite charity. It may include, well, it does include what we put in the collection plate at our houses of worship if we do that. It can include what we drop in the Salvation Army bucket at Christmas time. And it could be, Warren Buffett giving millions of dollars. All of those things are in there, counted as individual giving because they came from a person out of their private money. The next, if you see bequests at 9%, that is people giving in their estates, their wills, or sometimes you can give a bequest while you're still alive. But the important takeaway here is that 67 plus 9 is 76% of giving in this country comes from people. Some of them are dead people, but they're individual people. So grants have a role. They're there at 19%, and corporations are there at 4%. But a strong fundraising plan for a nonprofit organization needs to be more than just grants, because if you think about it, if you did a bar chart like this or a pie chart like this for your organization, and the biggest piece was foundations, you're leaving money on the table because there's individuals out there who are very philanthropic who are giving money. And if you're pulling from one of the smallest pools, you have opportunity to grow. But this is to say that foundations are not, as you can see by this chart, where most nonprofits are getting the bulk of their money. Grants have a role and a purpose, but they're not the only thing that funds charitable work. So grants are great for funding a program, expanding or doing a special project, or starting up something new. They're not a steady way to depend on your regular and recurring operating expenses, because they're given usually for a finite period of time, and then they're over. Whereas if you find a person who really likes your organization and gives every Give NOLA Day to you, that's renewable year over year over year, and it's smaller amounts from a lot more sources. So if one of them goes away, you're still raising money from all the others. But if you only have 3 or 4 grants and one of them goes away, you're looking at shutting your doors. Funders like things with neat edges. They're giving to you for a period of time, and they want to see you make a journey. They want to see you start something or expand something, or they want to know at the end of the year that their gifts resulted in something besides we're keeping the doors open, which I realize we still have to keep the doors open. And there's some ways to be creative about that in your grant fundraising, which I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about the basic rules of grant writing. I realize that you are, well, I assume that most of you are grown adults, and I shouldn't have to tell you the first one. Periodically, I'll get asked to do like a national organization has local chapters, right? And they give little micro grants to the local chapters. And I've done presentations for groups like that. And the people at the national organization say to me, would you please tell these people to follow the instructions? It's hard. It takes time to write a grant. And it's super tempting, as you'll see in bullet number 3, never cut and paste, to recycle your language for different funding opportunities. What can happen when you do that is that you're only half answering the question that they actually asked versus the question that you wrote on another grant, or you had in mind what you wanted to say, but you have to remember that the grant it's not, this is somewhere else in the presentation, but it works here. It's not about you, right? It's you are offering the opportunity to support your organization to somebody who has money, and they want to accomplish something with their money. So they ask you a question, you need to answer the actual questions they ask. So that is to say, what I hear from people who read grants and get grant requests is that some of us are not are not following the instructions that they gave us. And bear in mind that they have to say no a whole lot more than they say yes. So one missing attachment or one failure to address the specific question they ask you puts you behind the others who did, and reduces your chance of getting funding. There may be a scoring rubric, particularly more sophisticated funders. In my class that Claire Bay took, I ask a specific list of questions and I award points based on how well those questions were answered. So I may ask in the organization's qualification what the qualifications of your key personnel are. Well, you cut and paste from another one that didn't ask that, then you get 0 points from me because I asked you what the qualifications of your staff were and you didn't tell me. Always look for alignment, which we're going to talk about. A funder who funds medical research is probably not going to be a good prospect for an arts organization. Ask for what you need if it's what they want to fund. Make sure it's a fundable project. And I'm going to talk about that a little more. There are some projects that just make more sense for grants than others. And finally, it's not about you. Oh, there was supposed to be a different slide there. I can't see my Zoom. That sound you hear is my little beagle who has a treat regimen in the evenings. So I apologize for that. No. Sorry, I moved my Zoom boxes and now I can't. Okay. So it's not about you, because the golden rule of philanthropy is, at the heart of philanthropy is the premise that you are offering the donor the opportunity to invest in something that they believe in. This is both empowering and limiting, right? Because you're not asking for a handout. You're not sitting on the corner with a cup with your hat in your hand. You are making a difference in what you're doing. And you find a funder who wants to make that same difference, and you're offering them the opportunity to support the difference that you're making, right? It is, you're not in the position of begging, you're in the position of being a social change agent, finding a funder that wants to make the same social change and offering them the opportunity to make that happen through your work. Often, especially when people are new to fundraising and you feel this sort of lack mentality, this need mentality of like, can you please give us money because we don't have enough? And while that may be true, in reality, the conversation with the funder is, we're making a difference in this thing. And with your support and investment, you can be a part of the difference. So we are the vehicle for the difference that they wish to make in the world. So in talking about sort of how to think about a grant, there's a book I'm going to show you at the end of this slide deck. There's a couple of texts that I use actually in my class. Clairvay has this book that talks about grant writing as storytelling. And so there's an arc to storytelling where you're laying the groundwork, you're creating this conflict, there's a climax, there's a resolution, and there's the end of the story. And it's good, strong grants take you on that journey. And I'm going to show you what these elements are. So you're going to be asked what the qualifications of your organization or your work are, and that's where you're sort of in. They may not be in this order, but this is how the story arc is reflected in the grant. So you're telling about the organization is introducing the characters in the location, right? For example, Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts, he meets Ron and Hermione. So this is sort of setting up the issue. I'm a youth mentorship organization. I've been serving youth in New Orleans for 20 years. We specialize in art therapy and physical fitness programs for young people. My statement of need is where I'm building tension and conflict, right? So it turns out that Harry Potter's the chosen one and he's got to defeat Voldemort. In my story, because these young people that I'm serving in Orleans Parish have been disproportionately impacted by trauma. So they come to us with unmet mental health needs that can manifest in damaging ways for the young people and for the community that surrounds them. And I would include a lot of evidence on how we know that our young people in particular have something they need to defeat to live their best lives. So we're at the top. So now I've convinced you that there's this real issue. Either Harry Potter or Lord Voldemort have to win. And so at the peak of the story is all the stuff that in my Harry Potter example that the children go through to ultimately defeat Voldemort. In our case, as an organization, it's so here's all the stuff we do with these young people, and how we demonstrate that we can impact their lives. And then at the end, I'm gonna show you how we know that we did it. So our evaluation, the last part is sort of the epilogue. Okay, so we defeated him. I can't see my slide because of my Zoom buttons. And so, we sort of reflect on how the world's a better place and how we know we've succeeded, right? So I'm going to walk you through how to construct each part of this grant, but I wanted to lay the groundwork on sort of what these pieces mean in a compelling grant. You're setting up yourself as the hero. You're setting up the conflict that has to be resolved. You're showing the battle, right? Which is all the great stuff that you do. And then you're closing out the story by showing how, at the end of the day, the problem has been solved. So we're presenting the antagonist. We might acknowledge others in the fight. Ron and Hermione are there too, right? There's many valuable agencies that serve this need, but Harry's the chosen one, so he's got to be there too. We're including all the important information. We're making data meaningful, and we're positioning the hero, which is us, as the one to defeat the antagonist. This is about to get a lot less theoretical, y'all. I like to teach it two ways, depending on what kind of thinker you are. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this just in a minute. So we now know sort of what journey the grant needs to take us on, but we need to make sure we're telling the story to somebody who cares about the Potterverse or arts or whatever it is that we do. So we're going to try to find a partner to invest in our work that fits us. Because remember, you are offering the opportunity for them to invest in something that they believe in. So if they fund medical research, it's not that they think that art is bad. It's not that they don't care. It's that there's only so much money to go around, and they focus on the thing that, their mom died of cancer, and so they want to fund cancer research. I mean, they're not bad because they don't fund what you do, but if they don't fund what you do, you need to talk to somebody who does. So we're finding the people who want the opportunity to invest in something that we all believe in. So this slide's a lot more fun when we're in person, but I like to throw this one up there to say, what do these three people have in common? And the first answer I get is they're rich. And the second answer I get is, maybe they give to charity, they, it goes all over the board, and they have foundations is when we're starting getting closer. And the one thing that nobody gets that's the correct answer to this slide is none of these people are going to give you any money. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be mean. It's being a fundraising consultant. There's an old joke. It's happened to me with this guy who thought that grants were the answer to his problem. And he's like, I heard that Mackenzie Scott's giving away a bunch of money. Like, can't we get some of that? Mackenzie Scott, who, if you don't know, is Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, and she took half of his Amazon empire money in their divorce, and then has proceeded to just give it away. And she's an amazing human being, but just because she has a bunch of money doesn't mean she's going to give it to you. Oprah Winfrey has a lot of money. It doesn't mean she's going to give it to you. Like, you got to dig deeper than that. And so we need to move past that to finding what really fits. So grant writing is not difficult, but it can be time consuming if done properly, because you need to spend as much effort identifying and researching your prospect as you do crafting your proposal. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. I tell this to my students, every word you choose when you're writing a proposal should reflect the funder's priorities as much as possible. The only exception to that rule is if the funder's priorities are in conflict with us for some reason. So if the funder has some culturally biased language that we don't use that language back. But in general, if the funder talks about low-income populations, we talk about low-income populations. If the funder talks about people living in poverty, we talk about people living in poverty. We want them to see their values in what we present to them as much as possible. So as we're choosing and crafting this language, we're picking everything based on what we know that they care about. You can be creative about how programming will suit your funder, but you can't be unrealistic. If they fund mental health and you're an arts organization and you have a component of your organization that does art therapy, that is directly related to mental health. If they do athletics and you're an arts organization, and you see that they fund other after-school projects, but they're all tennis and football, they don't fit. There's some room to be creative, but in general, once you find the fit, your chances for success are so much higher, and is worth the time to do the research rather than writing proposals that are dead before they leave your desk. So some of the things that we want to ask ourselves when we're looking at a potential funder is, do they accept applications? Have they demonstrated a real commitment to funding in your subject area? And I'm going to show you how to find this out. Does it seem likely that they fund in your geographic location? Is the kind of money they give away the kind of money that you need? And my buttons. What types of organizations does the funder tend to support? So there's a number of ways we can find that. I'm going to illustrate those, okay? And when I get through with how to look up a funder, I'm going to stop and check the chat, unless Clairvay interrupts me sooner.
Yeah, nothing's in there now. You're good.
Okay. So one of the ways that we can find out, and going back to my slide of Drew Brees, Mark Zuckerberg, and Oprah Winfrey, there is one exception on that slide. It is possible that you could get some money from Drew Brees depending on what you do. So the first thing we do is look to see if they have a website, right? So this is a screenshot from the Brees Dream Foundation website, and we see that their priorities are cancer patients, care and education for children and families in need. So we read this first and we're like, okay, well, let's go back to my youth mentoring program. So they're providing care, education, and opportunities for children and family in need. I'm serving children in need through my youth mentoring program. We don't really know what he means by in need, but we know, okay, let's look a little deeper now, right? We see some alignment, so it's worth moving forward. Another screenshot from his website. So we see that he's doing a couple of quarterback clubs. So clearly there's some athletics in there. There's a bunch of cancer stuff here. There's some youth after school programs. So my youth mentoring mentoring program is moving forward. It's okay. I see some alignment. If that information is not available, I beg you to remember this resource right here. I don't know. Can you see my little arrow? GuideStar, GuideStar.org, I think. But you'll get it. Sorry, GuideStar. Foundations file taxes just like the rest of us. The form that they use, we use a 1040, they use a 990. Your organization also uses a 990 because your organization is also a nonprofit. A foundation is a nonprofit organization. Its mission is to give away money. On the 990, foundations must list every grant they made in that grant reporting year. So when you go to GuideStar, they're going to try and get you to do a paid subscription. You don't need a paid subscription. It's not worth the money. Sometimes they make it kind of hard to find this little button, but just keep looking, you'll find it. And if we clicked on Show Forms 990, it would show us the 3 most recent tax returns filed by the Brees Dream Foundation, which is going to include 2 pieces of information it's going to include lots of pieces of information, but 2 that I use the most often are what grants did they make in that year and who are their trustees. Their board members, their board of trustees are also listed on the 990. So if you're trying to figure out if somebody knows somebody at the LOS Freeman Foundation, the way to find out is to pull their 990 and look at their trustees list. But for our purposes this evening, I want to know where Drew Brees, the Brees Dream Foundation is giving its money. A caveat, because this stuff, foundations like nonprofits get an automatic extension. So this information is usually at least 18 months old. But it's still, because it has to go through the IRS and then eventually it ends up at GuideStar. But it's a super helpful way to see their giving history. So I click here, I open his most recent 990, and I get a giant form somewhere. I can't see. This is 82 pages long. That's what I want you to see. But somewhere in that giant long form, I apologize. Someone just rang my doorbell and the dog is upset about it. Somewhere on that giant long form is a list of grants. So I have shown you a very small selection of what was on the Brees Dream Foundation. And here's what I learned. I see how much the grant was. I see what it was for. Some foundations are better about detailing that than others. And I see who it was made to. This tells me where he's giving and about how much I ought to be asking for. In this case, this was page on page on page on page on page of organizations that received grants from Brees Dream. I can do this with any foundation anywhere in the world. Okay. Well, any Any foundation that files taxes in the United States. So again, we need to remember, you're probably not getting money from any of these people, but you are going to find somebody you can get money for, and I'm going to tell you where to look besides the 990s. I subscribe to the Foundation Center. I subscribe to Philanthropy News Digest. I subscribe to Grant Station. There's a bunch of them out there. The Foundation Center is a paid grant search engine. Let me strongly emphasize to you that you should never pay for a grant search engine. The Greater New Orleans Foundation has a platform where you can access the Foundation Center at their site. Last I heard, the New Orleans Public Library has added it also to their sites. And I was doing a presentation in St. Tammany Parish a couple of weeks ago, and they have it at their sites, and you can like spend like $12 to get a St. Tammany library card. When you do a foundation search, you get a lot of stuff back that says, we're this organization in Portland and we fund arts work all over the United States. And so you'll think you got this big list, but when you really go look at their 990, that agency in Portland hasn't made a grant outside of Oregon in years. So, you know, you'll find things that appear to fund where you are, but you need to keep doing the homework and looking to see what other opportunities are, what their realistic alignment is. I see a bunch of stuff going on in the chat, so I'm going to take a second here. Or is this anything I need to address, Claire? Oh, no. Okay. Somebody put the link to GuideStar in there. Awesome. Thank you. I really didn't say why you wouldn't. Why you wouldn't get money from. Oh, well, that's an excellent question. With the exception of because they don't give money to everybody, and if you research, you I'm trying to think of a succinct answer to this question. When I go to a cocktail party and somebody says, "Oh, you're a fundraiser," you should ask Bill Gates for money. That Bill Gates, he gives away a lot of money. Bill Gates does give away a lot of money. He gives away a lot of money to eradicating disease in developing countries. He gives a lot of money to public education in the Pacific Northwest. He gives money to building up the healthcare sector for various communities. He does not give money to youth mentoring programs. So that's why I'm not getting any money from Bill Gates. Just because they're rich doesn't mean they're not giving you any money. The exception to that being that, so I don't actually know what Oprah and Mark Zuckerberg give to, but I know that I don't know anybody who's getting money from them locally. But if I did the research, I would see that the O Foundation or whatever it is has not made any gifts to youth mentoring organizations in Louisiana ever, or in fact any grants to Louisiana at all, or maybe only to the D-Day or the National World War II Museum. But you know, as you look at what their other giving is, you see trends that help you identify. So I don't have any evidence that Mark Zuckerberg or Oprah Winfrey would give us money because they're not. And so unless you've got something that aligns with their interest in some way, you're barking up the wrong tree. Just because there's a lot of money there doesn't mean the money comes here to New Orleans for youth mentoring organizations, or so they don't give because they haven't, is the answer, really. Okay, so that's the end of sort of okay. Oh, wait. Why? Oh, it's not letting me go back. Oh, there we go. I missed this last. So there's places to search. The first thing I do, I write grants for multiple organizations and multiple purposes. The first thing I do when I start working with a new organization that's working in a space that I don't know is figure out who their competition is, for lack of a better word. I do grant work for a youth workforce development program. It serves opportunity youth, 16 to 24, disconnected from education and employment. There are, as you may know, several organizations that provide workforce development for that population because it's a really high need population. And we know that connecting them to meaningful employment opportunities is a great way to address the cycle of poverty. So if I'm writing for one, I'm going to go look at the websites and the annual reports and the program from the gala and anything I can find online about all the other groups that do the same work. Because if I see that the Keller Family Foundation has funded 3 other organizations that do opportunity youth workforce development, that's a good sign to me that there's alignment within the Keller Family Foundation. And maybe I won't get the Keller Family Foundation's money, but I happen, I've done my research and I know that 3 of the trustees that are on the Keller Family Foundation are also on the Rosemary Family Foundation's board. And so I may start to strategically steer my applications toward areas where I know that they are invested in the work that I'm doing. So that's particularly for arts organizations. There are many good ones out there. You're not stealing somebody else's donors, right? I mean, you're not actually like going to them and saying, I want you to quit giving to Kid Smart and start giving to Yaya. I mean, you recognize that a foundation that has alignment with the kind of work you're doing, and you have a different story to tell, right? Your story arc is different than the other one and so maybe they want to invest in both. That's the attitude that I take toward it. Is I know that they want to impact the same issues. So how do I show them how their investment in me can even make a deeper impact in the problem that they want, meaning volume, not that I'm doing it better necessarily, but that they can extend their impact even farther into the field by also investing in me. So the next chunk of this presentation is actually going to be like, what do you do to start writing? I am happy to pause here for a minute. I don't care if you want to unmute and talk, or if you want to put anything in the chat. Okay. All right. So here's what you came for. Now that I've sort of laid out the make sure you're writing the proposal to the right person, let's talk about how you actually write the proposal. So, and this is what we do in my class. And most proposals will ask you for the problem statement first, even though that's not what I showed you in the story arc. It's in a different order. What usually comes up front in a proposal is what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And this is the thing that we have in common, right? I found a funder that cares about youth, opportunity youth, and their place in the workforce. Okay. So now I need to build the narrative of why, like, what's the dragon we're trying to slay here? Like, let me tell you how powerful Lord Voldemort is and how he ruined the wizarding world the last time he was in power. Like, what I tell my students is the name of your organization should never appear in this section, because it's not about you. It's about why you do what you do and the problem that you're going to resolve. So this is where youth disconnection rates and how that's impacted by trauma and systemic racism goes. That's where children have unmet health needs, and so they are not able to access quality educational curriculum. And so we're expecting them to do well on the test when they can't see the board. That's where this goes. Nowhere in this am I talking about myself. I'm talking about the problem, the social ill that I'm trying to address. If you are an artist, you still have to have something here. There is a lack of beauty in this part of town if you're doing a public art installation. There is a gap in true representation of this particular lens of your art form in our community. Well, I got to get ahead of my slides here. So it's why you're asking me for the grant. It's what I it's in the vein of what I care about. I should care about. So now you're going to make me care about the specific need that you are addressing. If I care about poverty, there's a whole lot of things that go into poverty, right? So this is the place where you are showing me how poverty is a really big problem among children of color in Central City. And you're showing me Central City specific data and child outcome data, because that's the thing you're working on. And so you need to make sure that I care about that you've shown me that there's a problem here and that somebody's got to fix this, right? So we're going to start with the problem. We're going to go to the causes of the problem, and then we're going to go to the cause that you act on. An example I'm going to use throughout these slides is recidivism and incarceration. Okay, so we know that Louisiana is the incarceration capital of the world. We incarcerate for a while. We were kind of going back and forth with Oklahoma, but I think we're on top, as it were, at the moment. We incarcerate more people per capita than any other state, any other country in the world. This is a big problem. We have too many people in prison. The causes of this problem are many things. They are lack of their trauma, their systemic racism, their bad policing, they're also that when a person is released from incarceration, they're statistically more likely to go back to jail after having been released, which is the thing we're going to act on, right? So as I'm building my case, I'm going to say, okay, we got way too many people in prison. There are so many reasons why this is a particular problem in Louisiana, and it's a function of poverty and all this other stuff. And in Louisiana, more people, or whatever the stat is, are more likely to end up back in prison after they've been released. A lot of that is because they can't get a house and they can't get a job. And that's what we do. We connect, and we still haven't said that. We're just talking about the problems of people being released from incarceration and how difficult it is for them to stably re-enter society, period. And then in our next section that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about what we, Harry Potter, do to defeat Voldemort over incarceration. Okay. Problem should be not too big, not too small. We are not going to achieve world peace, but we can reduce crime in our neighborhood if we have community what do you call, like, night out against crime? Like, we build community presence and create safe places for people to be outside and interacting with their neighbors. We're not going to serve world peace, but we can impact the safety of a community. So we're gonna make it doable but meaningful by picking a focused cause and a focused population. I've been asked before, if I would consider hiring some people to work with me to help write parts of grants, because sometimes I have more than I can do. And the answer, there's not a single part that I can outsource. This is the part that takes the most time to some degree, because I really have to build the case, and I have to sit there and I have to do a lot of research, and I have to figure out what really are the impacting factors on our incarceration saturation. But part of doing that research is what gets me excited about the work that we do, right? Like, everything else I'm going to write revolves around this part. Like, this is the dragon that has to be slayed. And so as I'm sort of collecting the information, I'm building the story, and I'm saying, I'm getting as excited as I hope the funder's getting, in like, this is a huge thing, and it's bad for people, and I want it not to be. So, as I'm doing this research, I'm creating this is the point, right? Everything else is in service of this part where I've said, here's what we need to accomplish. And so, and I need to make sure that the point I'm proving is what I'm actually acting on, right? I mean, so if I'm proving that too many people who get released from prison end up back in prison, then I'm going to focus my research and my language around how, how that's the problem that I'm focused on. So Kimberly, you asking a question, or are we just getting feedback because you cut out? I'm going to quit talking. Kimberly, if you're talking, we can't hear you. So I don't think. Can you, Claire? Okay. Okay. So we must be getting some background noise. So you want to make me, the funder, believe in the problem. I believe that there's a problem. So, we want to make it, we want to convince somebody there's something that needs to be done, but we don't want to make it hopeless. I mean, we can thread through there that, studies show that connecting a person incarcerated from incarceration with employment support reduces recidivism, like the rate at which they go back to jail, by 20%. We don't want to make it sound like we're the only ones addressing recidivism and people being reincarcerated, but we do want to talk about how housing services are limited for them, right? So while there are many organizations who are providing mental health services for somebody being released from prison, there's a lack of housing prevention. Again, I haven't said my own name yet here. I haven't said my organization's name yet. I'm setting myself up for the problem that I'm going to resolve. And we want to avoid circular reasoning. The problem is that we don't have a community pool, so building a community pool will solve the problem. Well, no, we just because we don't have a community pool doesn't mean we need a community pool. We need to make a better argument for the fact that we need a community pool. Don't assume I'm not going to read every slide to you because you can access these, but put your facts forward and think like the opposition. It's hard to do that, but I need to prove that the person reading this proposal may have an unconscious bias against people who've been incarcerated. So, I need to think about how I've proven that the people who are being released from incarceration can be contributing members of our society. And if we just support them and give them access to certain things, so I'm building sort of a case that somebody with a bias different than mine wouldn't take issue with. We're not writing to them if we don't know that they care about about the justice system and reform and more effectively dealing with our social problems than just incarcerating people, right? So if we don't already know that they sort of care about that, we're not writing to them anyway. We want to use data that's meaningful and relevant. We want to use data that's current. It's a frequent conversation about how the world has changed since COVID. There's, our kids are drastically behind in education in a different way than they were when the study was written in 2015. They're impacted by mental health issues in a wildly different way than they were in a study that was written in 2015. So we need to make sure that we're looking for relevant data as well. Here's where you find them. Boy, the census website is difficult to deal with, but there's data there. There's research publications. Sometimes those can be hard to access if it's a medical journal and you don't subscribe to it, but the library can help you. You can use your own organizational data. You can use feedback from the people you serve. I never use someone else's research, but sometimes if I'm trying to position how I'm going to talk about a problem, I may see how another organization talks about it. I'm not going to take the same approach, but it may give me some ideas. If I'm doing justice reform in Louisiana and I know that Oklahoma's got as bad a problem as we do, I might go look at some organizations in Oklahoma that are serving those and see sort of how their website addresses the solutions, and it may help me start to think about how I'm going to tell this story. I would never quote WWL, but WWL is reporting on somebody else's work most of the time anyway. So, I might look for media articles, but then I would go back to the source. And you can find a lot by Googling. Okay, quick break on problem statement. So now you have fully convinced whoever's reading this proposal that the thing you're doing is valuable, meaningful, and worthy of doing. Any questions there? And we know from the prior section that we're telling this to somebody who cares about it. All right. So now now the rubber hits the road. Now we have not said our name at all at this point. But now we get to talk about ourselves. So I've convinced you, hopefully, that there's a problem. And so here's the resolution to that problem. Here's the how we're gonna slay this dragon. So I'm gonna break this down into goals, objectives, activities, and ultimately outcomes. Okay, and bear with me. I'm building a logic chain here. I know this feels a little bit rudimentary, but if you can follow, the most successful grants are very clear about what the big vision is, and then what the steps to get to that big vision are, because that's what the funder's paying for, right? This is the part where you're saying, if you give us money, we can do this. That's that. I'm happy, Clairvay, for y'all to distribute these slides if you want. I have not given them to you yet, but I'll need to.
All right. So yeah, once we wrap up, she can give it to me, and everybody that registered today, I can send it out to them.
Okay, great. So we're starting at the top. The biggest thing is the goal. And there's one, right? There's the big thing, the big vision. This is like, okay, so over incarceration is a problem. My big goal is to reduce recidivism for returning ex-offenders. There are other things that contribute to over incarceration, but my big goal is to fix this one part. You remember back on where I said, we're not doing world peace, but we're doing community safety in this community, right? So my piece of it is that I'm going to reduce the rate at which people who've been released end up being reincarcerated. That's my big goal. That's my ultimate why. That's how the problem in the statement of need is that we over incarcerate. I'm going to resolve a portion of that by ensuring that once somebody comes out of prison, they don't go back. Under that are objectives. Okay, so we got the big goal. By the way, REXO was the terminology that was being used for this particular grant that I worked on for the federal government, and this terminology changes. So I'm not saying that's the most current way to talk about these humans who live among us, but that was what the terminology was for the federal agency at the time. All right, so our objectives, we usually have a few of those, right? And they're the components, they're the things that have to happen to complete the goal. They have a definitive, they're how we reduce recidivism among returning ex-offenders. It's definitely not the terminology we use anymore, but so I want to, in my statement of need, I've talked about how housing and employment are significant barriers to a person who's been released from incarceration to remain out of incarceration moving forward. So my objectives to reduce incarceration through reducing recidivism are to house them and to employ them, period, right? This is what I'm going to do. I've built my case of support that didn't have anything to do with me, how these individuals are impacted, and the role that employment and housing plays on over incarceration in Louisiana. So in order to complete the goal of reducing that, I need to house them and I need to employ them. Under that, okay, so we got the big goal, and then we've got 2 or 3 large objectives. Then we've got these very specific activities under each objective. So, and we need to include rationale for those. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. And this is where specificity gets important. So my activities are, I'm going to take 200 people returning from incarceration and I'm going to assess them for employment skills, because here's my rationale. Meaningful employment increases job retention, right? So I got 200 people, very specific. This year, I'm going to work with 200 people who've been released from incarceration. I want to house them, and I want to make sure they're employed. So under employing them, I'm going to do the following activities. I'm going to assess them and see what kind of skills they have, so that we can get them in jobs that they're good at and that they'll want to stay in. Of those 200, I'm going to determine that about 125 of them could use some more training to get into careers that are meaningful to them. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I know that jobs that require certifications can be more stable than entry-level minimum wage jobs, right? And then I'm going to give all 200 of them some placement support to maximize their possibility for stability in the job and retention of the job. So these are the things I'm going to do around making sure that these people are employed, which I've already proven reduces their chances of going back to prison. Okay. Do a quick time check here. I need to start moving a little faster. So we're not going to confuse objectives with outcomes. Our objectives were the things that had to achieve the goal. Our outcomes are going to be what we think is going to happen at the end of the year, and I'm going to get into that now. So the outcomes are, I said that I'm going to reduce recidivism. I'm going to do that by employing these people. How do we know that that worked is where outcomes come in. And that's what we're going to cover in the evaluation section. Quick break for questions. Okay. These are traditionally portions of the grant. So that when you're doing a grant application, they're going to ask you what the problem is you're working on. They're going to ask you what your program is to address the problem. And they're going to say, how do you know you were successful? And so here's where we're going to talk about that. So this frequently called the evaluation design. This measures how well you met your goal and objectives and how well those activities led to your desired outcomes. My desired outcome is to reduce recidivism. Okay, so let me not get ahead of myself. So my big goal, my big vision in this case is to address the crisis of incarceration, particularly for people who have been released going back to prison. My objectives were what has to happen to get to the goal. I have to house them and employ them, right? My activities are all the things I'm going to do to house and employ them. And my outcomes are how I measure how the activities and objectives contribute to the goal. It's going to make more sense here in a second. I want to be smart. I want to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So my goal was to reduce recidivism. My objectives were employment, housing. My activities are all this stuff. My outcomes then, how do I know that I reduced the recidivism rate? Well, at the end of the year, at the end of 6 months, 75% were employed for at least 6 months. 80% remained stably housed for at least 6 months, and 95% did not return to prison for at least 6 months. So my big goal was to reduce recidivism, which is the return to prison. My objectives for doing that are to make sure they have jobs and housing. And then I had a series of activities that I explained narratively that impacted employment and housing and therefore reduced recidivism. And when I'm done, this is what I think the outcomes are going to be. 75% of, yes, we accomplished the goal because 95% of those 200 people were not reincarcerated within the grant period. So you need to address what the outcome is that you'll be measuring. How does it relate to the goals, objectives, and activities? How are you going to measure it? Are you still staying in touch with these individuals? How do you know if they went back to prison? How do you know if they're still housed? How do you know if they still have jobs? What are your milestones toward achieving that? Mid-year, we've served 175 of the 200 that we plan to serve. How are you tracking the data and how is it managed? And what are you doing with the information that you collect? These are all things that could mean, we're adjusting our employment training platform based on how this new opportunity we launched was, or something like that. Here's something I didn't say at the beginning. I suspect most of you guys know. A grant is real close to a binding contract. If you write to a funder and you say, here's how we're going to spend your money, here's what we're going to accomplish, they're going to expect you to report on that. And so if you say you're going to measure how long a person maintains employment, you're going to have to report on it. So you need to make sure you can measure it. You can be creative about what you're going to do with the data that you collect. It can help you do things a little better if you see that you're not quite hitting that benchmark. So let's tweak this thing that we do and see if we can get better. It can also be used to help make your case if you're new and you don't really know how many of the kids in your art therapy program are going to stay on grade level because they had their mental health needs met. Then you can say, we're going to collect baseline and see how we do, and that'll help us make the case for future funding later. But somewhere in here, you need to have explained your assumptions and reinforce them there. So in my example that I'm using, my assumption is that if people are housed and employed, they're less likely to end up back in jail. And I've defended that several times and said, so here I'm showing you how they're fed, how they're employed and housed, and we know that results in reduced incarceration. Any questions here? Oh, I hate not being able to see your faces and know that whether you guys are digging this or not. What do you
Question. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. So I'm Abraham. I so I deal with a lot of the nonprofits in the area, and I want to ask you, what have you realized has been more effective concerning reporting, evidence-based modeling, or would you say more of like quantitative reports to kind of send out something more so that kind of shows the data, but shows kind of the narrative behind that in a way that looks effective for grantors to be able to follow the story of pretty much the impact that you're doing. And then I think the second part of that, out of the evidence-based modeling, how do you have anything that's going to show impact-based reports on impact studies?
Like, do I have a sample to give you?
Yeah.
Yes, but I can't. Well, because I'm a contract grant writer, so nothing that I write belongs to me.
Okay,
So
got you. I understand.
My clients. So I'm not at liberty to share it. But I'll answer your question first by saying whatever's in your report should have been in your grant. So whatever you told them to get you to give them the money in the first place is what you need to be reporting on. If you said you were gonna, keep returning ex-offenders housed at 80%, then you need to say our actual housing data is 82%, yay us. Or it was only 75%, but the reason why is because housing costs got all stupid after COVID and we can't, and we're working on new ways to access appropriate and affordable housing for our clients. Sometimes you don't make it. Sometimes you set those objectives and something happens, like a pandemic or a hurricane, or one of your program people gets pregnant and goes on maternity leave, and so we weren't able to take as many kids in our program as we did because we didn't have as many bodies. These things happen, and your reporting should be a dialogue. Now, I'm talking about a specific, like, you got a grant from Keller you told them you were going to house and employ people being released from incarceration. You told them it was going to be at this rate. You know, when I sit down to write a grant report, I look at what it was I said I was going to do, and then I tell them what I actually did. I suspect you're talking a little bit more sort of how do I communicate with my donors in general, and let them know how we're doing as an organization on a larger scale. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's kind of been in mind, I think I had a meeting beforehand, and it was interesting. One of the things they mentioned was the difference between, well, the difference, the impact shows from showing percentages, and that between showing like how much it saved. So if I versus me showing like 82%, might say, well, based on this, it would have saved, 82,000 in housing costs for these prisoners who went over here. And I think my question is really, what have you seen has been effective, and what necessarily sources are you pulling from for like some of the data?
So we're getting a little outside of our subject area here, but what I will tell you is what the data that I'm pulling from needs to be, and this actually answers a question in the chat too, is the data that I'm using should be the data that I'm collecting. So when I wrote that section that we just talked about to whoever I asked for funding, I decided a year before I got the grant, well, I decided when I was writing the proposal what it was I was going to measure and so there's, I'm the one who decides what I'm measuring to gauge my organization's effectiveness. And I'm collecting data on that, and I'm reporting back on the data I collected. So that can be, for instance, if you're working with kids in schools, right? And you think that your after school tutoring is going to raise their GPAs, but you don't, or raise their LEAP scores, their achievement test scores, right? But you don't have access to their achievement test scores. You're not the school. You don't have, you're a community-based provider. And so you can't say one of our goals is to raise their LEAP scores by 10% because you don't know what their LEAP scores are. You're going to have to find something else to measure that you do have control over and that does speak to your specific work. So I'm not going to claim that I'm going to reduce crime in New Orleans by keeping people who've been released from incarceration from reoffending by committing crimes, right? I can't measure that. I can't be responsible for that. What I can be responsible for is, of the individuals I serve, were they housed? So to some degree, that's outside of grant writing, but that's strategically positioning your goals. As far as how you communicate it, sometimes the story can be effective. I work with a group that specifically mentors children who have an incarcerated parent. And in my work around that group, I have data that shows that a person with an incarcerated parent has all this bad stuff that ends up happening to them. When I'm telling them the story about how the grant did, I might tell the story of one kid in my program who got accepted to Southeastern and is on the right track. So I think we probably should put a pin in this dialogue and hold it for the end, or perhaps we can email after, if that's okay, Abraham.
Yeah, definitely. We can definitely do that. If you could, at the end, just don't forget about me. Could you
My email's gonna be on the end. You can email me.
Okay.
Right. She's going to provide the email to everybody at the end.
Okay. Yeah, it's on the slides. Okay. Thank you, Abraham. And then to answer the question in the chat. So if measuring feedback from participants, but you have a hard time if you can't collect the data, you need to figure out something else to collect. And my students really struggle with this, mostly because they don't actually work for the organization. So they kind of have to work with what they get. But you know, if you're not getting participant feedback, then is there a way to measure something else? The mentor, if it's a mentoring program and you want the kids' parents to tell you that the kid seems more confident, but you can't get the parents to turn in the survey, create a different metric to gauge, you know, that the mentor, the instructor in the program is counting the number of times that they volunteered. And in the beginning of the term, you know, they never raised their hand, and by the end of the term, they raised their hand 5 times. You know, you may have to create some different qualitative and quantitative measurements. Understood. I've done a lot of work in Central City, and so that's kind of my go-to for an area where I know a lot of data. But you're absolutely right. There's no more convicted criminals in Central City than anywhere else, and I don't mean to characterize any community as in a biased way. A community that I've spoken about a bunch and worked with organizations working there, so it's just the neighborhood that comes to mind when I talk about where great work is happening. But I appreciate that. Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, I'm sorry. A great platform for improving reporting. There's a group called Gulf Coast Eval. I don't know their website, but maybe Claire can look it up for us. Gulf Coast Evaluation Network. That does a lot of work around supporting people and creating meaningful outcomes, and measuring things in an effective sort of way. And so I want to keep us on track to get through the content that we need to have, and also give you a resource for how to access additional resources on creating meaningful matrices. But the folks at you put it just to me, Claire, so I put it to everyone. The folks at Gulf Coast Eval can be a great resource, and then I would certainly, if I can help you brainstorm it, I will. But my work is usually more on the, like, we've got those measures in place. So let's move on from here. Your budget, okay, project budget. I have to do this at a high level because I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here and get through. All right, so when I work on a project, I really like to have the budget first. And the reason that when I tell a client that I want the budget up front, it's because I cannot make an argument for why you need the money if you don't know what the money is for. Right? Like, this whole thing is asking for an investment. So if you don't know what the investment's for, how can you defend that you need it? So starting with the budget creates that dialogue. Like, okay, we know we want to serve children who we know we want to serve children in the after school program. We know we want to include art therapy. Well, how many children are we going to serve? We need to say that in our grant application, right? Well, how many children we serve depends on how many art therapists we can get. And if we have to pay the art therapist $15 an hour, then we got to decide, okay, we're asking for $20,000 here. So how many art therapists does that help us afford? So then how many kids can we serve? And then if we have a caseload, as it were, you know, like ratio of art therapist to child of 5 to 1, what can we reasonably expect for those outcomes for that child to be? And it's all driven by what our capacity to invest in the project is, which is what we're asking for, right? So if you can start with the budget, the budget will tell the story of why you're raising the money. We're raising the money because we need to hire art therapists. We need to hire art therapists because we have a critical mass of kids coming back to school after COVID who are demonstrating deteriorated mental health from the isolation and the fear and trauma of the time, right? So So if you don't have a plan for how to spend it, why are you raising money for it? So and once we decide what we're raising the money for, then we find the funders. And we decided, by the way, in a mission-driven process. I use an example a lot of, so if you're an after-school music program and you see this grant that funds after-school tennis programs, and well, you're on a school site and the school site has tennis courts, so I guess we could do tennis courts if we had the money. I mean, the kids might like to play tennis. It might make them come to the music part. No, we're mission-driven to advance the cultural legacy of New Orleans through music to these kids. And that's what we're doing. So we're not going to go play tennis because there's money for it. We've made a decision that we're advancing the culture. We're connecting the children of New Orleans to their cultural heritage by teaching them uniquely New Orleans art forms. Okay. And so that's what we're investing in. That's what we're budgeting for. As we develop the budget, we also want to, we want to make sure that the people who actually teach music are part of that conversation. We want to make sure that the finance department has seen the budget that we submitted to the grant, so that if they get the grant, they know how they have to spend the money. And we want to remember that if we said we were going to hire 3 art therapists and buy paint with the money, then we have to spend the money on art therapist and paint. That's our ethical responsibility. As I said, things happen. The 3rd art therapist we had got sick, and so we had to redirect the funding toward an assistant for the other 2 art therapists so that they could serve more kids. We can do that, but we need to have a conversation with the funder first and let them know what's going on. They want you to succeed. They've shown you that by giving you the grant. And so now we're going to move forward with dealing with the forks in the road and doing that in partnership with our funder. So, and to be clear, when you're applying for a grant, they're going to want to see a project budget. That's part of what you have to give them. I believe that I should be able to tell kind of by your project budget what it is that you do, like your budget itself. I should be able to look at it and kind of get an idea of what you're doing, because the budget should tell a story. And it's a planning tool. It's a great place to start to help you think through what you need to accomplish the things that you're going to accomplish. This is really important, and it's hard for people who have always done it the other way to transition to, but I'd like for you to really think about it. Your budget is for the whole project, not just what you're asking for. We're a community-based youth program that does music, physical activity, and arts and crafts. That's my youth program. I may be asking the funder to fund, so say I'm asking the funder to fund specifically the physical activity part, the fitness and fun and fitness with my youth program. I want to give them the whole fun and fitness budget, not just ask them to buy jump ropes and seesaws, right? Because, and the reason why is you need to be specific. You need to ask them for a specific program, but we want to ask for the whole program, because if I only ask them for jump ropes and seesaws, I still have a director of fun and fitness that needs to collect a salary. But by matching dollar for dollar every grant that I write for a specific thing, I never find a way to cover that person's salary. But if I write the budget to include all of the expenses that go into fun and fitness, which includes the staff, which includes the rent on the building, which includes the seesaws and the jump ropes, which includes the insurance, which includes the electric bill to turn on the outside lights when we're on the playground at night. And that may all cost $100,000, and I'm only asking this funder for 10. I'm asking for 10,000 toward that whole budget. It is a mistake, a common mistake, but a mistake to, unless the funder absolutely requires it, and most, I'm here to tell you, most of them don't. unless they specifically want a line by line accounting of exactly what items you're going to spend their money on. And some of them, particularly honestly, the ones that give you the least money want the most detail on exactly what that money's going to. But if you're going to the Keller Family Foundation and you're asking them for $10,000 and it costs you $100,000 to run the whole program that you're asking them to support, tell them their $100,000 is going toward that. I'm sorry, their $10,000 is going toward that $100,000 project. To the second bullet point, you still have to show that you know where the other, or you have a good guess for where the other 90,000 is going to come from, right? So your budget has to balance. You have to have a section for revenues and a section for expenses. We start with the expenses. We figure out all the stuff that we need to run fun and fitness for a year. Then we go and we say, okay, what's paying for this? It may be other grants. It may be money that we raise in other ways. It may be maybe our kids pay a small participation fee. Maybe, excuse me. Maybe they do a concert that we sell tickets for, and when we take the concert money and we invest it back in the program, and it's revenue for the program. Whatever it is, it's a guesstimate. You know, we don't know really where every dollar is going to come from in the next 12 months. We don't know where every dollar is going to come from tomorrow for the most part, but we're giving them a revenue that shows $100,000. We're giving them a budget that shows $100,000 in revenue and $100,000 in expenses. Part of that $100,000 in revenue includes what it is that we're asking for here. And then we fill up the rest with estimates. This is always the most complicated thing, and it's so much easier when I can see your faces and tell if you're confused, but I can't. But it's critical that it balance. It's critical that the number of revenues and the number of expenses are the same number, because if you're telling me that it cost you $100,000, but you're only showing me where you're going to get 50 of that. If I give you 10, how do I know you're going to do all the stuff that you said you're going to do? Because you don't have on the other hand, if you tell me it's going to cost $100,000 and you show me that you've got $200,000 for it, why am I going to give you a grant when you've got more money than you need to do the thing you said you were going to do? So it is forecasting, but it should balance. And it's really important to keep in mind, people don't think through. Sometimes people don't think through how much it really costs to run a program. If you have an executive director and you have 3 programs that you do fun and fitness, you do arts and crafts, you do music. Probably 25% of the executive director's time is somehow involved in fun and fitness, whether it's supervising the person in charge of fun and fitness, whether it's supporting the communications around fun and fitness, whether it's making sure the building is maintained and the playground is safe. It's part of fun and fitness. Those things all go in your project budget. And so when people ask the question, well, if, how do I keep the doors open and the lights on if I'm only writing grants for projects, which is what I've been saying this whole time, right? In the beginning, I'm like, they're good for projects. They're not good for ongoing expenses. Well, some of those things that you think of as ongoing expenses are still reasonable expenses for the program that you're raising money for. Does that make sense? I hope. I don't know why I'm asking, like I'm going to see you nodding or anything. And again, budgets are forecasts. Things change in the real world. That's why we talk to the funder about it. People go on maternity leave. Pandemics happen, and so we can't do our programming in person anymore. We have to go virtual, which changes our expenses. And we got to pay for Zoom, but then we don't have to, our utility bills went down. Whatever happens, it's an ongoing dialogue. What happens at the end of the year, as long as you spent their money within, so you give them $100,000 budget, you can spend that $10,000 on whatever part of that $100,000 budget you want to. And if you keep it broad as much as possible, when you do get that funder, looking at you, New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation, that wants exactly line for line, exactly what their money is going to be spent on, then you still have some freedom. You still, because so you have to, that $25,000 chunk has to be paid for by this, but I've still got the rest of it where I can put this money anywhere I need to make things happen. So it gives me flexibility in my fundraising. And all the funder cares about is that we said we were going to reduce BMI in our kids through fun and fitness by 3 points in the year. And so as long as we do that and we spent their money for the programming that does that, they're happy. Okay. That's the end of the budget section.
I have a question.
Sure.
In reference to the evaluation, I don't know if you finished that or you still have to do that. But in reference to the evaluation, is it the same thing as a report at the end of, being funded? Is it similar? Is it in the part of the grant when we complete the grant?
That's a great question. So what I'm speaking of is the part that goes in the request. When you turn in a grant request before the activity starts, right? What I'm saying is your evaluate, what they call usually in a grant request is called the evaluation or the outcomes. That's my projection of what I think is going to happen. Everything I've been talking about is my forecast. And then we got into this conversation about how you report on it. But when I submit the grant, when I ask for the money, I say, I think that 80% of the people that I serve will remain stably housed. That goes in my request. Here's what the problem is. Here's what I'm going to do to solve the problem. Here's what I think the results of my work are going to be, is what goes in my evaluation section. And then a year later, I look back and I say, well, I told him it was going to be 80%. And hey, we're at 83%. So when I report to them what actually was. But in the what I was talking about in the evaluation section is my projected outcomes that I'm telling them I'm going to accomplish so that they'll give me a grant. And then we got into a conversation about how to position what I tell them when I'm done spending their money, on what we managed to do. So I'm going to look back at what I told them I thought was going to happen, and then I'm going to report on what actually did happen a year later after the grant period.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the last thing that usually gets asked in a grant proposal is how, and every proposal is different, y'all. I'm just trying to pick the major themes that usually are asked in one way or another, in most proposals. So, so they're going to want to know, okay, so I'm going to give you this money to do this fun and fitness program. And you've told me how you're going to do it. And you've told me that you're going to reduce BMI by such and what. So when my money's done, is it over? Or we just, okay, well, that was great. We helped some of those kids, but we didn't keep helping them. And we didn't, so how is it going to go on? Because they're not going to give you the same grant over and over and over and over again. They want something, as I said in the beginning, with a beginning, middle, and an end. They want to leave a legacy. They want to have made an investment that mattered. Now, the reality is, as we all know in the nonprofit sector, is we're always raising money, but we need to give them some justification for how, once their money is gone, we're not just going to fire everybody and close the doors. Like, we have a plan for how your investment will leave a legacy. I don't like the word legacy very much because it's just there. It gets into the whole hero myth thing, but it's how will the investment have changed things long term? It's not about their legacy, but it's about sort of how does the fact that we were there leave the world a better place? Because the number one rule is don't ever assume a funder will renew after the funding period. They don't want a money pit. They want to start something. They want to accomplish something. And that's why the most effective approach to grant writing is something with those concise edges in a beginning, middle, and an end. And why in the way earlier slides, I said grants are better for expansions. You know, we expand and we're done. And now we've arrived at serving more people, or we've added a new component. We were doing fun and fitness and music, and we've added this visual arts component. And so now we've accomplished that. If it doesn't live on, why would I do it? Right? I mean, so, I've got lots of things I can invest in. If I got invested in this one thing that's going to change things for kids ongoing, or I've invested in this other thing that's going to change things for kids for a year, and then they're back where they started from, right? I mean, I'm going to pick the one that's ongoing. So there are some exceptions if it's a one-time thing. It's a performance, it's some other event or a thing that happens once. That can be an exception to the rule. We don't have to sustain it because we're not doing it anymore. We only need to do it once, but we better defended why doing it one time mattered, that mattered on some kind of a scope. And sometimes it can be startup costs for a sustainable system. I've got a client that helps schools recoup Medicaid funding for providing health services to kids. So it cost us money because it costs us staff and time to go in there and show them how to do it. But once they're doing it, they recover all the money from Medicaid, so they don't need us anymore. And so there's no reason to raise any more money. And sometimes, most of the time, the answer is, we're just going to have to keep raising money from somebody else. But there's some ways to defend how we're going to do that. We've expanded from 150 people being released from incarceration to 200 people being released from incarceration. And so now when we go to approach other funders, we can say we've grown by, what's that, 50, 25%? I'm a writer, not a mathematician. But we can 33%, I guess that would be. We can demonstrate that it puts us in a better position to raise money because we've made this leap. Or maybe what was the example I used earlier about something about a kids program, that we've increased it. We don't know. We just started doing it. So we don't know how we're going to impact it. If you fund us to get this going, then we can show that our intervention did change
the BMI.
We could. So maybe we weren't measuring the BMI before. We don't really know how much impact, but if you fund us for a year, we're going to study this, and then we're going to be able to say, hey, we can reduce BMI by this much, and that's going to help us position things with other funders. Honestly, I do not believe in a gray area in ethics. We're not lying, we're not defending anybody, but we can sometimes are spinning a little bit. It's going to sustain because it has to sustain. So your investment helped us because at the end of the year, we're in a better position to raise money somehow. Maybe just the way to say it. So we can say we're gonna include a fee for service once, or maybe we've started with a population that wouldn't be able to afford the service, and then as the program gets established, we can add on families at different income levels to both diversify our audience and so that those guys who can pay for it do. And that'll allow us to continue to support families who also can't pay for it. Maybe we have some kind of an entrepreneurial business venture. There was a guy, I don't know if he's still around or not, who had a youth mentoring program, and part of it was agriculture, and they grew peppers and they made hot sauce, and he'd sell the hot sauce at the farmer's market, and so he had to get the guys going, and once they were making hot sauce and they were selling hot sauce. Or we might, all this other stuff is just fancy ways to say you're raising money. We might say we're growing and we're expanding, and we're going to hire a development director this year, and which will allow us to develop additional diversified funding streams. But nothing makes me madder, especially when people get federal funding, where they hire like 6 people because they're going to expand, and there was never any thought given to what happens when the funding period is over. And then not only were people counting on you for services, but you also laid off a bunch of people who've been working really hard for those people. You got to have a plan for how it's going to sustain, even if the plan is we're just going to We're going to go to AFP meetings, Association of Fundraising Professionals, and learn how to raise money through individuals, because we know that's where most of the money comes from, right? But in general, you know, the signs of a sustainable program are that you budgeted for it anyway. Like, we knew we were going to do this. This is what we're here for. We didn't create a budget just because we wanted to get a grant. Like, we already knew we were going to do fun and fitness for youth. The people who actually do it, you program people, which is probably y'all in many cases, but if you were, you know, a staff person in charge of fundraising, you know, you really want to make sure the people who actually do the work want to be doing what you're raising money for. You probably didn't hire a whole bunch of staff for it. Staffing, as we all know, is the largest expense line in most budgets, and so it's the hardest thing to sustain. It has excellent outcomes, which mean we get to continue, which means it mattered, and that we can find more people to invest in it, who want to make the change in the world. And we'd probably be doing it even if we didn't have a grant for it. Those are all things that show us that, like, this is going to stick around. Because at the end of the day, remember, you are the vehicle for the difference that they wish to make in the world. You are positioning your organization as an opportunity for someone who cares about hunger to leverage their resources to ensure that fewer people will go to bed hungry tonight and tomorrow and next year. And I think, okay, and so here are 2 resources that I like to recommend. I use these as my textbooks. The one on the left, grant writing, is kind of the science of grant writing, and the storytelling for grant seekers is kind of the art. I have my students read them together. You know, they read the statement of need part in the science book, and then they read the statement of need part in the storytelling book, and it sort of engages both, like, this is what's technically correct and this is what's compelling. And here's how to, because you can be doing great work. I got a quote somewhere that says nothing ruins a great project better than poor writing or something. I mean, it's like, you know, you have to engage and you have to answer the questions. And so kind of refining both of those skill sets at the same time, I find to be meaningful. Okay. So there's my email address. No need to ask me for the slides, because if you registered, Claire Vay is going to send them to you. We have time for some questions.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
everybody feel free to unmute. You can show your face, drop it in the chat. But yeah, we definitely have time. And like I said, all of the slides will be sent to everybody that registered. And the recording of the entire workshop will be posted on our YouTube. I'll make sure it goes on our Instagram when it's posted on YouTube. But we'll take any questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I am wondering, is there a rule of thumb about what percentage of your project budget you should be requesting from any one source?
That is a great question. And the answer is, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be sassy. It depends. How we would decide that, first of all, we would determine, so our budget should be what our budget is, right? I mean, like all that stuff that I said a couple of slides ago, like we've made a decision based on our mission and our priority as to what we need to spend to accomplish the things that we're mission driven to spend. How much we're asking the funder for depends on what size grants they usually give. So I would go look at their 990 on GuideStar and see that their grants, they write, and this is something you'll see, like there's the popular organizations like NOMA and World War II and Tulane, and and then some of these swanky families that own these foundations are given $400,000 a year to Tulane, but then they're given $20,000 to Bridge House, and so you kind of have to filter based on like, just because they gave a $400,000 grant doesn't mean I need to ask for a $4,000 grant, because that 4,000, they always give $400,000 to Tulane because they went there, but they're sort of people like us are probably more in the, if I see that there's a range, there's a bunch of them at 10 and a bunch of them at 50, and somewhere in the middle, I might ask for 25 and hope for 15. So it really should be geared more toward what I know about their giving history than a proportion of the budget. Unless their guidelines specifically say we only fund so much of a project cost, which can happen once in a while. It's not terribly common, but it does happen where they're like, because they don't usually they don't want to be the only ones in the game, right? Because that raises the sustainability question. If I give you $100,000 for your $100,000 project, like, first of all, like, why isn't anybody else paying for this? Like, is there something I'm missing? Like, why isn't this something that other people are engaged with? And okay, so once you spend my money, what happens then? So being able to show at least a few other funding sources, whether it's a grant or whether it's your other fundraising or all those other things that I talked about, is usually more compelling. It's usually more compelling to show that there's some other people in there, but there's not necessarily a rule for how much of it is them versus other people. It's more gauging what you're asking for based on what their traditional gift size would be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any
Yes.
other questions?
Yeah, I would and you've done a great job so far. I just want to tell y'all been great. I want to ask for organizations that wish to do capital improvements for like maybe their building or whatnot. Could you kind of touch on a little bit of that? Organizations dealing with capital improvement, because I know there a lot of grants are actually it seems like they don't really even touch on capital improvements as much, but it's a very big issue though.
It is, and it is hard to do capital through grants. You're right. What you have seen is correct, and it is difficult. A lot of funders don't want to pay for capital, and it's because of all the stuff I've said. Like they want some gratification, and so like they want to know that like we fed children, versus we fixed our loading dock at our warehouse where we distribute food. And some of that is just there's a great blog called it's called Nonprofit AF, and the guy who writes this newsletter column website thing, it's a guy named Vu Lei, and he's a person of color, and he writes a lot about justice and how fundraising perpetuates the white hero myth, and how it's sort of our traditional way of recognizing donors is basically just like elevating the white guy for helping all the not white people, and there's a lot of problematic stuff there that he's talking about. But one of the things that he talks about is how funders sort of they want to feel good about their gift, and so therefore they don't want to fund the stuff that has to be done, but that's a real big problem, and there's a lot of dialogue sort of challenging the people who have money to give away in large quantities to quit making it so hard for us to do our jobs. But the reality is capital, when I said earlier in the presentation about asking for things that are fundable, part of what I meant was I have a client that does the mentoring a child with an incarcerated parent program, and they also do some adoption placement. They're not political, but they have the ability to place adoptions, and they place 2 to 5 babies a year, but they serve 300 children with an incarcerated parent. I really encourage us when we're writing grants toward people who fund children's issues to write grants about the incarcerated parent program, because we're serving 300 kids, because that's really attractive to a funder. And while those 2 to 5 babies that we place we're changing lives there, if I'm trying to attract a funder, as much as I hate it, the reality is I want to put out front the program that I think that they're most likely to be attracted to, and then use my other money and the other ways that I'm raising money to pay for the thing that's not quite as sensational to attract a grant. Which is not to say that any part of the program is more valuable or less valuable than the others, but I have to raise money in a lot of different ways, right? I showed y'all that pie chart in the beginning. And so I'm going to focus my grant writing stuff on the stuff that I think is going to be the most palatable to the funder, which is probably not going to be capital. And so I need to raise money in lots of ways. And I'm going to focus my grant writing efforts on raising money from foundations that are the most competitive. And that blog that I mentioned, the Nonprofit AF, talks a lot about how wrong that is. And I'm not advocating it, but as a practitioner who needs to raise money right now, I can advocate for the system change, but I also have to tell you, don't spend a lot of energy writing money about capital because you're not going to get it. Write money about the thing that has a great elevator speech and use the money that you're raising in other ways to support your capital needs. There are some capital grants out there, and the reality is some of this, and this gets to be, boy, this is scary when I don't know who's on the call, but I don't know if y'all know who Frank Stewart is, but Frank Stewart is a multimillionaire who sold a bunch of stuff to a for-profit company and had a bunch of money to give away at the same time as he was writing scathing op-eds and taking out ads lambasting the administration for taking down Confederate memorials. And there are a lot of nonprofits that quit taking Frank Stewart's money because they didn't want to have to list him as a donor because they so fundamentally disagreed with the opinions that he was putting out into our society. And so one of the ways to raise money is by offering naming rights for something. We'll call this the just because you're on the top of my list, David Riggins, we're going to call this the David Riggins conference room. We're going to put a plaque for David Riggins in the conference room. And he's going to want to give us money so that everybody who comes through here will see that David Riggins gave us money. That dialogue is getting problematic as we continue to evolve and become more aware. But sometimes you can do that through corporate, and then maybe that's a way to do it. And that's a whole nother conference when we start talking about naming rights, but maybe there's a company that ethically aligns with the work that you do that might be willing to underwrite those improvements with some opportunity to brand it.
Hey, I have a question if we still have any time left.
Sure, I think.
Okay, so
when I'm talking. So
say again.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. My name is Ryan Baptiste, and I produce an event. I produce a couple of events, and I'm still in the process of looking for different grants and trying to secure funding to help produce the event. And I was thinking about incorporating. There were some grants and stuff like that that I was looking at that kind of give money to the purpose of what I'm doing, but not 100%. And I was just, I guess, wanting to know, like, would it be a good idea to, I guess, implement the things that they're asking for into the festival? Like, for example, I do a music festival, and I feel like there's a grant for like arts education. Like, if there was some way that, you know what I'm saying, our festival now incorporates arts education, or we give money to, arts education, is that a good idea to do to make us applicable for that grant, if that makes sense? Only
if it's not mission drift. Mission drift is the example that I gave about the music program deciding to play tennis too. If it reasonably advances something that you would want to do with or without the money, sure. If you were only doing it for the money, we don't. And I realize it's easy to say this when, you need money, but the reality is the people the people giving away the money shouldn't decide what we do. We should decide what we do and find people with money who want to support it. So
Right.
chasing money just because it's there doesn't usually go well. And usually the funder can kind of see it. But if we reasonably wanted to incorporate youth and connect them educationally to their cultural legacy, and so we could invite schools to bring groups and give them discounted admission, that advances everything, and the funder might want to pay for it, then sure.
Right. Got it. Okay, cool. Just wanted some insight on just going about, trying to conquer that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
If my grant proposals are constantly being rejected, is there like a program, or do organizations give you feedback on why?
Wouldn't that be nice?
I just asked.
You can ask, but particularly the local foundations are crappy about doing that. I mean, that's a real professional word there, but it's
so
are you talking about local family foundations, or are you talking about
just in general? If it's constantly everything I try to, get a grant for is being rejected, it's probably something I'm doing wrong. But just getting the feedback so I can, be successful in this area.
I think I have one client that his board constantly wants me to just apply for everything. And it's like, well, I shouldn't spend time and resources applying for things that I know don't fit. I know that Bill Gates is not going to give me any money, so I'm not going to write a Gates Foundation grant. So some of it could be casting the net too wide, particularly with local foundations. Relationships mean a lot. And so rather than starting with a grant, you might invite someone to come see your program, or, communicate with them in advance, or develop a relationship in a different way, so that the first time they're meeting you is not through a grant proposal. I realize that can be hard to do, especially if you're not hobnobbing with these folks who have family foundations because they have intergenerational wealth. But that's what board members are for to some degree. If we have board members who have connections, in reality, I wish they would all give you feedback, but most of them won't. So it would be worth getting out there and networking and finding out who else is getting them, and seeing if they'll talk to you. A lot of the challenges that we run into, I think, could be solved by talking to each other about our own experiences. And so I think, look at who they are funding and see if you know anybody who works there, and to see if they'll talk to you about it, and maybe they'll look at your proposal. And just I think we all want each other to, well, I think all of us on this call want each other to succeed. I'd like to say that everyone in the world wants everyone in the world to succeed, but we know that's not true. But I think most of us in the sector see that there's when we lift up all boats. And so, I would encourage you to kind of interact with your colleagues and see what comes of it.
Okay, thank you. And I think Abraham has a good question in the chat.
Okay, I'd be happy.
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask that also.
All right, we got 4 minutes left. So if you have time, could you navigate how to navigate being a fiscal agent and discussing that with grantors?
I don't encounter that a lot. In general, the folks that I work with have their own 501c3 status. As I have encountered, most of the grants that well, that's not true. I mean, there's a reason why fiscal agency is an option, so I think and I do teach this, that there's lots of reasons why you would go through a fiscal agent, whether it's because you're new, or because you're doing something once and you don't need a whole new 501c3 for that. I think when you talk about your organization's effectiveness, that organization's qualifications part that I talked about, that you know, that it's important to be direct and explain the relationship and the oversight with the fiscal agent, and to be transparent about why fiscal agency is where you are now, and if that's where you continue to be, or whether you're in progress to something else. I really don't know that was a good answer, because I really haven't dealt with anybody who works with a fiscal agent in a long time. Because I'm a contract grant writer, the people who are paying me tend to be larger organizations versus, and so I realize that I'm sorry that I'm failing you on knowing the grassroots on that in particular, but I do know people who do it. I do know that a lot of proposals give you the opportunity to list a fiscal agent. And I would certainly, in the organization's capacity part, explain why you have the capacity to administer this grant and why you're partnered with the fiscal agent and what your plan is.
Right, that I was about to
Maybe
say,
a better
that
question for
kind of gave the
Thursday.
example as to like why we had to get a new fiscal agent, like, and we went through all the legal allegations to like make sure our missions align. We cater to the same type of artists or the same type of organizations in the city. So like overall, if we're like thinking of like a common denominator of everything, as long as your organization or your program aligns with another organization, that's how you know it's a good potential partnership. And I think that's the same like lines we can go about with the fiscal agent. Because I'm also discovering with some of the applications that we've been receiving, fiscal agents being used, and I'm seeing the fiscal agents as an actual partner of the program or the event. So that's why it's also catered to like what Jenny said of why are they, you know, working together with you? And then you can go along the lines of that, like that narrative and that story of that point. Because it's not just being used as a fiscal agent, but they're actually a partner with the program, event, or activity that you're trying to add on to your organization or to theirs.
And I'm realizing as I scroll back up through the chat that someone asked a question earlier of what, and I glommed onto a different part of the question because I wanted to be, and I didn't address the part about, well, what if you don't have 501c3 status? And that's where working with a fiscal agent until you do, or in lieu of, is a great place to start.
All right, and we got one more question. Will this grant course be held again in the future, or is this a one-time thing because it's very informative to local organizations and culture bearers? So this was the test run of it. I knew Jenny had done this before with other organizations, and being that I knew that this was a major need in the local arts community here, that's why I wanted to host it. We thought doing it via Zoom was a little more convenient for everybody. So we wanted to see how this went this first go around. We had 97 people register and an average of 44 that attended on here tonight. So this raises a high alarm of doing it again. I am hoping that, I know I had already talked to Jenny about doing a part 2 of potentially like being able to allow time slots for you to bring in a grant that you're working on or something that you worked on in the past, similar to what you said, Lynn, to get some type of feedback to say like, okay, this is what you can work on better, but I don't know, maybe we can host another full workshop again. So these are thoughts that I'm having. We have been running programming since January of this year. We're taking a break during June and July. And I will revamp and start posting on our social media. All our social media handles is at NOTCFUND. Of upcoming programming and workshops. I do plan on going back with Chase Bank to do an investment workshop to say how you can invest money into yourself or into, you know, just raising money for your business, things of that nature. Also another Grow with Google workshop with KL and Consulting, and then another, some type of grant writing workshop with Jenny as well. Like I said, I took her class at UNO in 2018, and literally everything that she taught me that I'm still using to this day, and I'm able to utilize it in my job. Like literally, it was a great refresher course for me. So I do know that this is a really, really great help. So I do plan on doing it again. I'm reading all of your comments in the chat. Thank you. I'm so happy that this was a great help. I was very nervous, thinking like maybe people, would think like this is too much, but that's why I asked Jenny, is it okay for me to record this? Because I do want it to be out there for people to always reference. So it will be on our YouTube channel that is linked through our website as well. But of course, if you look up NOTCF or the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund, you can find us online. I think that's pretty much it. It's 8:02. I know people gotta go to work.
I welcome y'all's emails as well. To me, this is, I believe in lifting up all boats, and if there's something that I could have done better, I would rather know that than, protect my feelings. So, please feel free to give me any feedback. I don't expect you to take time if you don't want to, but if there's something that you really would like to include, and it may not be me, I can certainly bring other resources to NOTCF for training as well. Certainly love to hear your feedback and incorporate that in anything that we do moving forward.
Thank you all. You're very, very welcome. Like I said, I'm trying to put on more resources and workshops like this to just truly help the community help themselves. So also feel free to email me any feedback. Hold on, I'm going to type my email in the chat. Also, thank you to my team that is on the call as well. Our senior accountant, Maurice, and our grant specialist, Rosalind. Thank you all for always supporting the organization. I hope it was insightful to you all, being that this is the work that we do. So please, I'm sorry, I only sent it to one person. My email is in the chat. Please feel free to give any feedback or ask any questions. And remember, you can also do the same to Jenny. Yes, that's it. I'll wrap this up. Thank you all. You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
Hi. I'm just going to end it all. So it's about to go.
Bye, Claire.
Bye.